And welcome back to another episode of Debt Nation, where we are busy putting death out of business. I'm your host, Stolyarov, and today we're going to be talking about some of the proposals by the USTP, some questions that people have, USTP members have, about certain proposals, and we'll be working through those to find a resolution to some of those proposals. So before we start this episode, I want to just thank Thrivous. I want to say thank you very much to Thrivous and to Lincoln Cannon for sponsoring this episode. Nootropics Geoprotectors. If you want some for free, $5 all the way up to $160 worth, the more people that share the episode, the more free Thrivous you're going to get. So jump on that deal. The deal is in the description. That's Nootropics and Geoprotectors. Very, very exciting there. Thanks very much, Thrivous. And also I want to say thank you to I Am Transhuman, Dave Kelly, who is who's sponsoring the episode and got lots of cool posts coming out on that website all the time. So I want you to check out I Am Transhuman. All right, so how I'm going to work this, Chairman and Alex, welcome both to you. Everybody knows who you are. You don't need to introduce yourself. But how I'm going to work this, I'm going to put the question up, this section E8K up on the screen. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to head over to Alexandra Black, who's going to explain what she doesn't like about it, and then we're going to hear a response from the chairman, and we're going to go back and forth until we find a resolution or a discussion about this particular topic. So welcome to the show, both, and I hope we have a very productive discussion. That's what we're here to do. We're here to have a productive discussion, and I like... Alex, I like that you've brought this up. I like that you've come here to the show to bring up this question and find and formulate a resolution, because the more inquiries we have about things like this, the better and the healthier, the stronger the debate. So I really want to thank you very much for bringing this to the fore and for doing that. And I want to thank the chairman for taking the time, valuable time, out of his day in order to come on and help Alex, a USTP member, to find a resolution to the inquiry as well. So thank you very much, both of you. I think this is what makes the USTP strong as a party and resolute. All right, so I will now bring it up. So this is question 14. E8K, mandatory free housing for the homeless. And the article says, in recognition that unsanitary living conditions are a primary cause of the spread of COVID-19 and other infectious diseases, the United States Transhumanist-Party supports the immediate and mandatory housing of the homeless achieved by the means of rapid construction of tiny homes, including 3D printed homes, without regard for the building codes or zoning regulations, which must be immediately waived to allow such construction. Every homeless individual discovered by local authorities would be required to move into a separate small home free of monetary cost and would be granted free conditional title to the home. These conditions of the title would be that the new homeowner would be obligated to perform litter cleanup and other community service duties for a specified time per day under supervision, until and unless he or she is able to find different or better housing independently. The new housing communities would be subject to actively enforced covenants and restrictions prohibiting alcohol and recreational drugs. Such prohibitions will have a side effect benefiting transitioning the homeless towards meaningful, solid social participation and useful work. So now I want to, after I've read that, I want to cross over to Alex. So hello, Alex. Welcome to Debt Nation. Thanks very much for coming on the show last time. So what concerns do you have in the proposal 14, section E8K, mandatory free housing for the homeless? What concerns you?
Having been acquainted with some people in this category, I can tell you they will not go to the Salvation Army, and they will not meet these conditions. And if they do not meet these conditions, we have more super spreaders out there. We've got to make the deal more attractive with some aid and some reasonably spaced shelters. But they won't get anywhere near there if we do not bait them. You know, put that UBI on a card and make it attractive for them to come in without so many conditions. Now, I have seen Trailer Park Boys. I can see where you think this is going, perhaps tonight. Okay, I can, but we've got to come up with a better answer. So somewhere that avoids all the hazards you see, but will actually get these people in and help them.
All right, Chairman Gennady, you've heard the concerns. What do you say in response to these concerns raised?
Yes, indeed. So, first of all, thank you, Steele, for facilitating this discussion. Thank you, Alex, for sharing your concerns. Now, I hope you understand the primary intent of this proposal beyond the immediate benefit that it would present of essentially reducing one of the main avenues by which COVID-19 and other infectious diseases spread. This is intended to help transition the homeless onto a path toward being self-supporting, being productive, being able to participate in the economy. So the intent isn't for them to stay in these tiny homes indefinitely or perform the litter cleanup indefinitely. They will have the tiny homes as shelter, essentially, and they will own them, and they will be able to do with them what they see fit, subject to these conditions. Now, these conditions are mainly intended to prevent those tiny home communities from lapsing into what a lot of, say, homeless tent camps have become. There are certain parts of cities in the western United States now where homeless individuals have camped out in public parks, and there could be tens of them there. And they've kind of set up these makeshift shelters, or they've set them up along railroad tracks, and there's absolutely no order, no discipline, and no upward mobility possible in those conditions, because a lot of the behaviors of those individuals serve to keep them in that state. So if a person is down on their luck, let's say, and they're in a situation of despair, on the one hand, it's understandable that they would turn to alcohol or drugs in an attempt to cope with that. But on the other hand, those habits are the habits that will keep them in that state and prevent them from getting out of those destructive conditions. So I had been thinking, how does one break that vicious cycle? How does one enable these individuals to rise again? And the key is to set up an environment which is not conducive to those habits. And it's not so much a punitive environment. I'm not suggesting that they be kicked out of those tiny homes if they're discovered with alcohol or drugs. I'm suggesting that the alcohol or drugs be confiscated because they're prohibited within that community. And then there are going to be supervisors, essentially, individuals who are there, who organize these litter cleanup efforts, other community service efforts, who help make sure that the inhabitants of these communities stay on task, and also they could give good advice or point them to opportunities. Nothing prohibits these inhabitants of the tiny home communities from seeking out other jobs or earning money on the side or engaging in other activities as leisure. So if they want to read books, if they want to pursue art projects, if they want to have community get-togethers where they do something productive. Of course, during this pandemic, there might be some social distancing measures involved to prevent the spread of the disease, but assuming that that subsides over time, normal gatherings would be able to happen, and these people would start forming social bonds. They would start being more integrated into mainstream society. And with the help of the supervisors in these communities, they're going to be set on a path towards self-improvement and becoming self-supporting. Now, you mentioned spacing of these homes, and that's certainly not precluded under this proposal. There's nothing in this wording that would mandate the homes being set very close together. Perhaps it could be the opposite, especially in this era of COVID-19. Perhaps a large space of unoccupied public land could be set aside for these communities, and then the homes could be spaced 30, 40 feet apart or more. And each individual can go out, there's plenty of space, they could do something outside on the land adjacent to those homes, as long as they're doing respectable things. So the idea is this is a transitional community for people, and we hope they don't spend their entire lives in it, but this is a mechanism to get them out of destitution and to also get them to improve living conditions for everyone else right away, because no one wants to be in an environment surrounded by litter. And instead of creating litter, now these people are going to contribute to cleaning it up. So that's my rationale. Hopefully it alleviates some of your concerns, but the idea is not just to be punitive, but also to give them a positive, constructive way out of their predicament.
Alex, would you like to respond?
Well, Donati, was there any alcohol in that sparkling cider you were celebrating with yesterday?
No, actually,
Really?
I'm pleased to say I have been sober for the past 28 years. So
There you go. Okay. Well, you know, alcohol, I can take it or leave it. But not everyone is that genetically blessed. Okay. So it seems like an uneven playing ground. It's easier for me to leave alcohol alone than it is some people. Okay, but there are some merits to your ideas. But I think that while the COVID situation is on, we can't sort people by how productive and well-adjusted we think they are. We need to care for them all right now, or it's going to spread even worse. Okay? So even temporary shelters, space them a bit apart, just take everyone in. Don't worry about their vices right away. Just get them tested, get them isolated. Not all around some fire pit. Sharing
and
a
I
bottle
don't.
of Boone's Farm. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I don't disagree with the imperative to get these people housed and spaced reasonably apart. I just think it's possible to do both in effect very quickly, because if somebody is coming in and locating these people and telling them you have to go find shelter, understandably the tiny homes will take a little bit of time to construct. They can be constructed rather quickly. Some of them can be imported. There are nonprofit organizations that have already been pursuing these efforts in California cities, except they've been chased away sequentially by city governments who have restricted this kind of development. But with this proposal, these groups can be given carte blanche to operate, and they can come in, deploy their tiny homes. If there are not enough tiny homes still, we can start building them, but we can also ask for hotels with vacant capacity to take in people if they are able. And then over time, these kinds of conditions or parameters can set in. So if you have a good group of supervisors right away and they can say, okay, let's set up a community for you right now, and we can start doing good work to help combat this pandemic, then maybe within a matter of days, this kind of lifestyle can be initiated. If it has to take longer because there aren't enough resources, then it will take longer. I am not one to make the perfect the enemy of the good. I recognize there would be time spent in transition. There may be some investment of resources needed to get to that stage, but I'm also thinking it can be done fairly quickly. And the reason is unemployment has surged dramatically among people who aren't homeless. So a lot of people would be happy to have jobs right now. And the USTP platform proposals for responding to COVID-19 could constitute a major jobs program. So these supervisors of homeless individuals may be people who also need employment right now. And we could tell them, well, here's a good job. We will pay you a decent salary in order to come on board and help these people transition. Likewise, for our other proposals, we're trying to get several 100,000 emergency medical personnel trained within a 3-month period. That's another one of our platform planks. We're trying to get one new permanent hospital constructed for every 50,000 in population. That's another plank. So that would be jobs for construction workers. It would be jobs for architects, for engineers, for the medical professionals who will work in those hospitals. So generally, I think getting these kinds of arrangements operational as soon as possible would be a great boon for the economy and for people's livelihoods.
Alex, did you have anything to say to that?
Yeah. I think it's going to take time to roll out these things. I think that the federal government sees that the first place they are going to go could be a FEMA camp or a prison.
And that's certainly not the intent of this proposal by any means. We're not trying to confine people. We're not trying to restrict their liberty in any way.
Well, we kind of have to restrict movement if they will not self-isolate, no matter what their economic status is.
Well, right now, even under the so-called shelter-in-place orders that a lot of states have implemented, people are still allowed to go outside as long as they don't gather in large groups. So, for instance, I can go outside on my own and take a walk or go for a run. And I can go in some remote location, some trail in the wilderness if there's nobody there, and run all I want. And likewise, I think these homeless individuals, if that's what they choose to do, would be able to do that. Now, with these conditions to the title of their homes, it would be like they have a full-time job. So their full-time job would be joining these litter cleanup efforts. And again, they can be orchestrated with social distancing. So the supervisor could say, okay, person X, you take this part of the street, person Y, you take this other part of the street, and when you're finished, report back for your next assignment so that you're not in close proximity to one another or to other people. So that could be arranged logistically in a way that still respects individual freedom. But in terms of these conditions, I think one could make a reasonable case that the shelter is the compensation for doing that kind of work. These tiny homes, they're less expensive than ordinary homes, but they do cost some amount of money to build, perhaps $10,000 for a nice tiny home. And it takes a while to earn that amount of money for anyone. And for these people who are picking up litter, that's probably along the lines of minimum wage employment. So think about how long somebody would have to work in the normal economy to save up that kind of money at minimum wage to get $10,000 for a tiny home. And I think getting that home right away to be able to have shelter, have a permanent address, have a way to move up in the world in exchange for working in that kind of occupation, at least for the time being, is a pretty good deal. It is a better deal than employers in the private sector would generally be willing to afford homeless individuals.
Good point. You said something about that reminded me of the whole mind shift, because even in the other communities, a week or two has made a big difference in how we see the world and how the world may function in the future. So perhaps the homeless people are also making such shifts in thinking.
Most definitely. And this emergency has definitely caused all of us to reevaluate what the priorities should be in economies and societies, in our own lives, what we can do, hopefully, to prevent this kind of situation from arising again. Steele, as you are fond of saying, this is the time of great reflection, and I hope that people all over the socioeconomic spectrum are engaging in this kind of reflection. It's easier to do if one has the accommodations not to have to struggle for survival. And hopefully this proposal will assist with that as well. Because if these people now have a roof over their heads, they have some food, and let's say they're going out to clean up litter, and now they're no longer having to struggle just to survive hour to hour, day to day. While they're cleaning up litter, it may not be the most enjoyable or entertaining task, but now they have time to think, and they have time to consider, what do I want to do with my life? What happened in this society to bring us to this point? And what am I doing now that is different, that offers me an opportunity to solution to these problems?
Alex, is there anything, if you wanted to respond, you can. Otherwise, I was going to ask you, is there anything in the wording of the document that you would like changed, or any amendments that you would like to see, or omissions, redactions, and that would be my main question.
I was mostly balking at the word conditional. I'm starting to see it a bit more Gennadi's way, but at the same time, during this current pandemic, we've got to care for everybody, whatever their situation is. I found this meme I was looking for. So it was written in a Hong Kong subway. Now we're seeing it everywhere in English. It says, we can't return to normal because the normal that we had was precisely the problem.
Yes. And it is true. There were aspects of our societies throughout the world that lacked the resilience, that lacked the capacity to respond to this kind of pandemic. And there were aspects of the society that were stressed beyond acceptable tolerances. I do think it was unacceptable to have this homelessness crisis in many cities in the United States. And that crisis was brought about by intentionally unaffordable real estate, by these NIMBYist movements. NIMBY stands for Not in My Backyard, by special interest pressure groups that resisted new construction whenever it was proposed. So that even for middle class or upper middle class individuals, housing became extremely unaffordable. And of course, for people of lower incomes, they were just priced out of homes altogether. And for some people, they're able to find shelter with friends or family or roommates. They're able to somehow scrape by. But on the margins, especially if somebody has a tendency toward depression or substance abuse, that person is going to be displaced, and that person is going to find themselves in a vicious downward spiral. That doesn't mean that that person is incapable of doing something productive or incapable of contributing. It just means that terrible societal and political arrangements push that person over the edge. So I have been thinking about how to resolve this problem, not just for the sake of those people, but also for the sake of the rest of us, because nobody benefits when we have essentially homeless people camping out on street corners or in parks. That is particularly highlighted in a pandemic situation where these people can become disease vectors. And I have been thinking about a way to turn them from disease vectors into agents of the solution for this situation. And yes, I think you and I initially perceived the term conditional to be different. For me, it's more of a legal term, essentially. If you have a title can have certain conditions or restrictions on it, and that's fairly standard. Even with most homeowners, if you have title to a home, there are certain liens on that title. So there could be a lien for your local utility company to come by and work on the infrastructure, and they can even do that without notifying you sometimes. I have had that happen to me, not always pleasant. I hope that when that happens, they try to at least give consideration to my land and not wrecking it when they finish their work. So with conditions, though, there can be different ways of carrying them out. And if a condition is not perfectly adhered to, the default solution isn't to take away the title. The default solution is to remedy that breach of the condition, which is why I'm saying under a reasonable enforcement regime, if that person does lapse and brings a bottle of alcohol or some sort of addictive substance onto the property, the supervisor isn't going to say, you have to leave your home now, you've lost your title. The supervisor is going to say, all right, hand it over. Why did you do this? Let's talk about this, and let's try to address the root causes of this behavior and hopefully get some improvement going forward.
There's still a difference between somebody that has a nightcap or two and somebody that is falling down in a bottle. Okay?
And yes, with people in normal circumstances, obviously some people can adapt to drinking a certain amount of alcohol and not have that impair their daily functioning. But if a person is known to be prone to a lack of restraint or to this kind of downward spiral, I think they need extra support. It's why, for instance, groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, they don't tell their members, oh, you need to just drink in moderation from now on and everything will be fine. In those groups, the reason why the people there need help is because they're incapable of that kind of restraint. So their prohibition on alcohol is total because it's easier for the human mind to deal with absolutes. If a person is told, okay, no more of this, you must absolutely refrain from doing that, that's an easy rule to follow. It might take a bit of willpower, and they might need help from others to solidify that expectation. But it's a lot harder to tell people, well, you need to exercise your judgment and make sure that you are prudent and moderate in your consumption. That takes years of habit. That takes a long time and a lot of personal experience to get right. And that's precisely what these people don't have. Now, once they graduate from this kind of arrangement, let's say they are able to find better jobs, they're able to find better homes, then they become free citizens. They can do whatever they wish. And hopefully they will have learned their lesson. Hopefully they will not relapse into those habits. Hopefully the memory of that transition will keep them going on the right path. And as an example, a lot of recovered alcoholics, they're not going to drink alcohol ever again because they don't want to relapse. Some of them might get to the point where they're drinking alcohol in moderation. That's up to them. But one hopes that that transition period has helped them to return to a better version of themselves.
real easy for me to say no to crack because I don't like the stuff. I mean, I mean the smell of it will just shuffle my feet back 3 steps automatically. Okay, real easy for me to draw judgment on that because it's not anything that I find particularly attractive. I'm just saying.
Yes, and I'm the same way. I don't find the appeal of those substances at all. I can tell you the story of how I've been sober for the past 28 years because my last experience with alcohol was at the age of 4. And my maternal grandfather lived in a remote Belarusian village. And there's a huge problem with alcoholism in the former Soviet Union. And at that time, it was a common practice for people in those remote villages to create their own moonshine. And he had a shed with all of this equipment where he made moonshine out of potatoes. And it was kind of a fascinating process for me as a young child. So I would go visit the shed and just observe all of the equipment, and he would sit there and make his moonshine. And at one point in time, he decided to give me a sip of the moonshine. I was curious. It was transparent. It looked like water. So what was this thing? And my throat burned for the next 2 hours. I hated it. I absolutely was repelled by it. And I decided there are better things to consume in this world than shed brewed moonshine made out of potatoes. There are sweet beverages, or there's just water. Why in the world would anyone want to consume something so horrid? So that was enough to convince me.
I don't mean to interrupt too much,
I won't
but
drink that
Jesus Christ, his first miracle was turning water into wine, Gennady, Chairman. So there's something there. There's something about alcohol that's not. It's not all moonshine.
Well, I can explain why that was considered a miracle in that time. Keep in mind, this was before sanitation systems. This was before the 19th century when finally, through massive infrastructure improvements, water became safe to drink. Prior to that time, water was more likely than not to be contaminated with some harmful pathogens. And while the germ theory of disease wasn't well known, through empirical experience, people realized you can't just take water out of a lake or an ocean or a river and drink it without some adverse consequences. So beer, especially lower alcohol beer, was a staple beverage for everybody, including children. It was a source of calories, and it was more sanitary as a result of the brewing process, the fact that the brewing process could serve as a disinfectant. So that's why alcohol was so commonplace, and why it would have been seen as miraculous for Jesus to turn water into wine. Now, my own thinking is Jesus was probably like a master illusionist, like the Penn Jillette of his time. So if this episode happened, he probably had some wine stored up somewhere, and he was able to do a kind of trick in order to, switch them out, get the audience to perceive it as having been a transformation, but they would have appreciated having the wine nonetheless, because that was a sanitary beverage that they could drink, and probably it was a low alcohol wine to begin with, so people wouldn't drink it to get drunk. They would drink it to get sustenance, maybe to get a little bit of a relaxant effect.
All right. Yeah. Well, that was a good side story. Alex, is there any more about this community, this housing project that you wanted to talk about? Any more questions, concerns?
Oh, just something a little bit anecdotal. I took in a homeless kid in the autumn, just because it felt like the right thing to do. And besides, I tend to press my house guest into service to help me with mom, because nobody can do this 24/7. So, but it wouldn't occur to me to tell my house guest how to live. Although my previous house guest that I took in last Easter, and he was dead a half a year later. He stayed here. No, he stayed here about half a year. Left in the autumn at some point, sometime before this other dude moved in. But he drank himself to death. Chardonnay.
Yes.
And
That's very
I don't
very
know
sad.
if I could have put any limits on him.
That's a very sad circumstance. Well, you know,
Jonathan Lyons.
I have my own ideas about this project. I actually agree with the chairman's proposal here. I agree with this, and I encourage people, if they want to change, or the vote is on now. It's still going, yes, Chairman?
Yes. So the vote will continue until 1:01 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow, which will be Saturday, March 28th. And
so to all those people who are watching live, please go and check your emails. An email has been sent out to all USTP members. Please go and vote on this resolution. There's a bunch of different amendments, and you can vote on the different amendments. Do you want to just expand on that quickly, Chairman?
Yes. So there are 26 questions. Right now, the question we have been discussing was question 14 on section E8K, mandatory free housing of the homeless. But if you go to transhumanist-party.org, the top post on that page is called Official Ballot or Platform Vote number 8 on COVID-19 response. And you'll get to see all the 26 questions. If you're a member of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, you should have received an email with a submission form and instructions on how to vote. It's fairly intuitive. For this question, for instance, you get to select yes, no, or abstain. Some of the questions have multiple wording options, in which case there's a ranked preference process. But if you are a member of the U.S. Transhumanist Party and you haven't, find me on Facebook, or you can make a post here in the comments for this episode, and I will make sure you have a ballot so that you can vote.
Yeah, unfortunately, your internet is a little bit weak, but I think people can mostly understand all of that. I agree with this. And there's a few different reasons why I agree with this. I think this is great because I remember seeing Hooverville. Remember Hooverville in the 30s, the Great Depression? And that was an unorganized mess. And, you don't want to see that proliferate, these Hooverville-type scenarios proliferate around the United States because, yes, it does weigh down on your productivity. It weighs down on your health outcomes. The other thing is we live in the 21st century where 3D printing, brings that cost down to 10,000. In an expensive form, $10,000, and you're talking about if you're gonna choose between the disenfranchisement of millions of people and leaving them to sort of fend for themselves, or having some sort of coordinated policy, such as a community where you can build these people up from a better level. They can start at a higher level than on the street, then I think this is better. Of course, nothing in the world is free, and therefore having some sort of community activity that is in a way enhances the values of work, the work ethic values. For example, this litter cleanup, or having a stipulation like no drugs. For me, drugs or alcohol, that's just a safety concern. If you have, because what I worry about is gangs. If you end up with uncoordinated Hooverville type scenarios, you end up with gangs. And in the United States, you have guns, so you end up with gangs and guns and drugs and alcohol all in the same place, which is very bad for children. It's very bad for women. It's very bad for men and mental health. It's a rise in crime and disease, and you end up with pockets of instability all over the country. So if you have this in at least a coordinated way, again, these people aren't criminals, they're homeless, so they don't have to participate in this. Of course, it says mandatory territory here, but if somebody's mental health is such that they really don't want to have one of these tiny homes, they don't have the capacity, I mean, maybe they'll go out into the wilderness, and these people already exist. They're walking all over up and down the roads. I mean, those people, they might be a carrier, a superseder, or whatever, but because they avoid social life anyway, they're not going to carry this disease and infect millions of people, because those are a type of very, very outcast people that you don't know exist anyway. They live by lakes and rivers. They're actually quite self-sufficient. They're probably mentally disturbed, and they'll be doing that. But you don't want to see in the 21st century a Hooverville type scenario that's uncoordinated. That will be proliferation with crime. And also the other thing is with these homeless people, of course, Alex, you're completely correct that this homeless epidemic needs to be solved now by the federal government and stuff. But also this builds up a better base to respond to issues in the future and in the near future, automation, all the other things that we talk about, and while they're in these communities, of course they can, like the chairman said, they can participate in woodwork, in arts and craft, in metalwork, in learning a skill, in learning, in innovating and learning. Maybe they'll come up with solutions to help other homeless people that are in their scenario. They can learn social work. They can learn social care. It's enhancing their human capital. And, the other thing is keeping the hospitals safe, because if you have Hooverville type scenarios with mass homelessness, you're going to increase that curve. You're not going to be flattening the curve. You're going to overwhelm the hospitals, not with just middle class people who, will sit in the lines and the queues in a coordinated, spacious way, but you're going to overwhelm the hospitals and first responders with homeless people who have mental issues, serious mental issues, or alcohol and drug abuse, and so first responders are going to have to be able to be choosing to whether or not to revive people who they don't really know. It'll be kind of chaotic. So you don't really want homeless people thrust into the mix at a time when the hospital system will be overloaded as well. So, there's a whole variety of things here, and I think what this proposal is saying is that you don't want to build a Hooverville of yesterday. You want to start from a new base standard of 21st century minimalism. You want to have a new standard for a new time in a new century where it's kind of like the UBI. We're moving beyond what people think what was acceptable in the 16th century, and you're saying, no, this is not how we have to create civilization from a new base in the 21st century, because we have the technology, we have the tools, we have the social programs, and no, these people aren't criminals. This is not a prison, but this is a way to enhance their mental health, their self-esteem, enhance their skills, underwhelm the hospital system, take care of crime, stop gangs from running everything, and not create huge masses of uncontrolled homeless people, as opposed to a controlled environment where you can rebound these people from a minimal level of access to food, water, shelter, and arguably healthcare. That's how I've read this. There's obviously more stuff in there, but that's how I see it when I play it out across the policy.
All right, you guys are convincing me. I will vote for. Even though I was going to abstain, I will vote for. And why don't we have these people create robots to pick up the trash? I tell you, you will find more innovation than you would expect in such populations, or even prison populations. They can invent things with nothing. I'm telling you that is a bit of untapped genius.
It's important to understand that these homeless are not criminals, so that yes, they are entitled to community services in a way that criminals aren't entitled to them. So they would be held to a different standard, and that standard is more humane, and they still have their constitutional rights, their First Amendment rights, and all of those other rights, state territory rights that goes with being an American. They're not any different to being an American. They're not a criminal. So that's really important to understand as well. These people aren't being treated as criminals. That's very important, I think.
Yes, and it's a great idea to encourage their creativity. Building robots is certainly one worthwhile task they could do. And, you know, if I were a supervisor in one of these communities, or if I were a city official who is overseeing the entire implementation, and I were to discover one of these occupants having made this robot, I would tell them, all right, if you want to send this robot in your stead to pick up litter, you will be allowed to do that because your ingenuity has still brought about the same outcome.
Yep, absolutely.
And they'll have them all making their own robots.
Yeah, and it's because it's not about stifling innovation, and it's not about punishing them for being homeless. It's about encouraging them to do the best they can and contribute to society for themselves and for society as a more broad general idea. It's not a blunt instrument. It's not a punishment. It's a new minimal standard of living for the 21st century, and I implore it. I think it's great. Is there anything else anyone wanted to say? I think that's been a good episode of Debt Nation.
Well, I just want to say I really appreciated the opportunity to have this discussion. These are the kinds of conversations that we need to have more of in the U.S. Transhumanist Party, and the kinds of conversations that set us apart from mainstream politics, because we can get together in a venue like this, in a forum where we have this one-on-one interaction, we consider what the other has to say, and we arrive at some shared understanding by virtue of our desire to search for truth and to improve human living standards for as many people as possible. I think that's a commitment that we all share within the U.S. Transhumanist Party, and as long as we share that commitment, we will be able to arrive at the solutions that are needed.
Alex, is there anything else you wanted to say before we left?
Yeah, I'm glad we got a chance to do this. I was getting a bit triggered about that one word, but I do see the wisdom in this. I would just like to see it have a less institutional smell about it. I don't know how we do that, but you got my vote on this, and I'll be sending that in shortly. Thank you, Gennady.
Thank you, Alex. And you know, if this passes, I hope it will, with your support especially, then afterward, I would be happy to publish an article by you, some sort of discussion of how you think this could be implemented most effectively, some of the day-to-day mechanics of this, because you've seen the wording. It's fairly concise, as platform planks generally are. They're not going to be a detailed blueprint for everything that happens. They're more along the lines of general parameters, but within those parameters, it takes a lot of finesse to get the implementation right, and that's where your input would be most appreciated.
I think we need some expertise at this point. Who do we know that might have worked in these fields that could inform this?
Well, you know, we do need more social healthcare workers and social workers in the USTP. This is a big area that the USTP needs to integrate people within. So if anybody out there knows more social people in that industry, absolutely reach out to them and bring them in. We do need more of these type of people who know aggregate social issues and problems. And, you know, this is also why we need to integrate the USTP into more scholarly journals, you know, where these sorts of ideas that you're bringing up, Alex, can be fleshed out in greater detail. Of course, Newton Lee doing a great job with the Transhumanist Handbook, which is a little more in depth and can go into you know, into more of flesh out more of these details than simply policy planks can in a much more general, broad way, where a lot of this sort of benefits are implied within the sentence. So, you know, yeah. But of course, this is definitely the USTP needs to grow out, and it needs to integrate more of all types of people. Always looking for more people.
I know someone who would be helpful in providing insights here. Charles Holsopple, with his Project 222. I'm sure he has some ideas about how to effectively distribute help to the homeless, because that's one of the central focal points of his project.
I really like what Barb Jacobson had to say in that London Futurist Zoom chat yesterday. Mm-hmm. She might be one. Anyway, if you put a call out to them, I think we will reach more people than if I did.
Very well. Well, right. Once we have the results of the platform vote, we will have a strong push for getting those ideas out and enlisting the help of experts to interpret them and provide guidance as to how to implement them most effectively.
Thank you, Gennady.
Certainly.
Thank you, Phil.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming and hanging out with us here today at Det Nation. Thank you very much to Chairman Gennady Stolyarov and Alexandra Black. You guys had a great discussion, and this was a very productive discussion, very reasonable, very understanding, and a lot of love between the two parties. So I thank you for that. Thank you for everyone for joining us, and thank you everybody who's keeping the show on life support while we're in these horrible times in the world. And everybody stay safe. If you don't need to go out, don't go out and get our current health problem is real and it's serious. So stay safe and stay healthy and do some exercise inside your home or whatever, and stay safe. And we will see you all on the other side of this crisis very soon. But in the meantime, keep watching Det Nation. Let's subscribe and get it up to 1,000 likes, 1,000 subscribers on the channel. That would be fantastic. So thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much, Alex. Been fantastic. Really, really enjoyed this episode. And we will see you both very shortly. That's a Det Nation where we are busy putting death out of business.
Thanks.